Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our virtual Life After King's Thanatology event. And although we are not presently on campus, I would like to start today by acknowledging that King's is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lenapehoik, and Attawandaron peoples. This land continues to be home to diverse Indigenous peoples, whom we recognize as our contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors of our society. Today's event is run in partnership between Alumni Development and the Thanatology Program. And we also work very closely with our Student Affairs Department. And I know that Jenny Richmond Bravo is online today. So welcome, Jenny, and your department as well. Our goal is to give students an idea of the types of careers our alumni have and how they got there. We hope that you will use this information wisely as you give some thought to your own life after King's. And now I would like to introduce our guests. Oh, but before I do that, I just want to quickly say that please feel free to type in questions. We will have time for questions at the end. So if you can use the Q&A function, I'll try to keep an eye on the chat. The Q&A is a little easier to follow, but I'll also keep an eye on the chat, but we'll make sure we get your questions answered before we conclude today. All right, now I'm actually going to introduce these fabulous alumni who have given up their time today. First, Sarah Morrow, class of 2017. While at King's, Sarah completed her bachelor's with an honors double major in thanatology and sociology, along with a certificate in loss, grief, and bereavement. Prior to studying at King's, she completed a social service worker diploma and autism behavioral sciences graduate certificate from Lambton College in Sarnia. After graduating from King's, she worked as a research assistant with the Research and Innovation Department at Lambton College on a project entitled A Coordinated Response to Assess Human Trafficking in Terms of the Problem, Prevention, and Empowerment. And that was in collaboration with Sexual Assault Survivor Center in Sarnia. During the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, Sarah was hired at Family Counseling Center in Sarnia as a program assistant to support their distress line and telecheck programs. Currently, she works full-time at the Family Counseling Center as an intake worker and as a registered social service worker. She enjoys spending time at Lake Huron on the beach or paddleboarding. Sarah also enjoys volunteering with First Robotics as a mentor for local teams and judging both provincially and internationally. So welcome, Sarah. Leah Marshall, class of 2015, Master of Social Work, and 2011 Thanatology. Leah completed her undergraduate degree in thanatology and then went on to do her Bachelor of Social Work and her Master's of Social Work at King's. Leah's work within the field of social work has focused on providing intersectional feminist-based, trauma-informed interventions to survivors of gender-based violence. She currently works at Fanshawe College as the Sexual Violence Prevention Advisor and at the Regional Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Treatment Program at St. Joseph's Hospital, providing psychotherapy to individuals who have been subjected to gender-based violence. Welcome, Leah. Next, we have Aisha Husseini, class of 2018. Aisha completed her undergraduate degree at King's University College, double majoring in psychology and thanatology. In addition, she also completed the certificate in loss, grief, and bereavement studies. For the past 3.5 years, Aisha has been working full-time in the mental health field at Cmha, the Canadian Mental Health Association, within their crisis services and bereavement departments. Currently, Aisha is also completing her studies in art therapy with the Toronto Art Therapy Institute and can be found working with a few community agencies within the London area as an art therapy intern. Aisha enjoys spending time with friends, family, and her 2 cats, Luna and Baby. Welcome, Aisha. And last but not least is Britton Williams, class of 2015. Britton is a social worker and enhancing care clinician at the Alzheimer's Society Southwest Partners. She earned her BA in Thanatology and her Bachelor of Social Work at King's University College. Britton proceeded to earn her Master's of Social Work through the University of Windsor, taking advantage of their program for working professionals, and graduated in 2020. Britton's role and office location has evolved over the years, but she has been employed with the Alzheimer's Society since 2015. In her spare time, Britton enjoys spending time with her horse, Peppy, wow, and is currently training in order to offer equine facilitated wellness, working towards dual certification as a mental health professional and equine professional. So welcome, Britton. Okay, now I'm going to ask questions and I'm going to be going around the room as it looks like on my Zoom, but maybe we'll mix it up a little bit. So I'm going to ask questions and all four panelists will answer, and then we'll move on to the next one. And then of course, we'll have time for questions at the end. All right, so I'm going to start with Sarah. She's in my top right corner. Tell us about your time at King's. What did you study? Were you involved in extracurricular activities? Did you have a favorite professor? That kind of thing.
Okay, so hi everybody. So while I was at King's, I studied sociology and thanatology and the certificate in loss, grief, and bereavement. I did my bachelor in 3 years because I had transferred from Lambton College, and I will say my 3 years at King's were great. I miss it a lot. I was a tour guide all 3 years and absolutely loved it. Learned a lot of the history at King's. I was involved with the Thanatology Club as the VP of communications, and as well I sat on student council. Favorite professor, I couldn't single out just one, but definitely Eunice Gorman's line, there's no such thing as normal. Normal is just a setting on a washing machine. I use at least weekly. It's my Instagram handle now because I just love it. And anytime somebody says, oh, I'm not normal, I'm like, no. Normal is just a setting on a washing machine. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Britton, we'll go to you next.
Sure. So my journey to King's was I started on main campus studying biomed, and then I had what I call my quarter life crisis, where I was sitting beside all these people who wanted to be doctors, and I said, it just doesn't fit for me. So I did some volunteering and soul searching and discovered this program I had never heard of called Thanatology. So came to King's expecting everyone in the class would be very depressed, wearing all black. And my first professor was Darcy Harris, which of course, long blonde hair, so kind and warm. And that really turned me on to exploring loss and death. And I ended up partnering that with a social work degree for my undergrad. And I think they just go so well together. I also took some electives in disability studies, which also just pair so well. I love that King's has that variety of disciplines that just work so well together and complement each other, and professors who really collaborate and work together so well. Some of my favorite professors, of course, were Darcy Harris and Eunice Gorman. And then on the social work side, Dermot Hurley is just so skilled. I love watching him work. And Laura Beres, of course. And getting involved, I highly, highly recommend getting involved in groups, clubs, anything. I was on the intercollegiate horse competition group, Western Equestrian team, which was a lot of fun. I was also on the social work student council, and that's where I met my now husband. So that was really fun. We were on that together, and we also took some thanatology classes together. So definitely worth getting involved. You never know who you'll meet.
Great, thank you so much. Aisha, we'll go to you next. Tell us about your time at King's.
All right, so at King's, I studied psychology. I started with psychology, and then in this, I believe, I don't know if it's like this still, but in second year, you're allowed to start taking thanatology courses. And the first course I took was Children in Death with Carrie Arnold. And Carrie is just so lovely. She is my favorite prof. And I just love King's. I love that the classes are so small. You get to know your profs. I think that's a really big advantage. And Carrie was able to be one of my references for grad school, which was so lovely. We got to know each other pretty well. While I was at King's, I played rugby. So that was the huge extracurricular that took up my time. I played varsity rugby over at main campus. And so I didn't join a lot of clubs at King's, but rugby took up a lot of my time. And so, yeah, I guess actually, you know, I did outside of school, I volunteered at the Canadian Mental Health Association in my 3rd and 4th years on their support line. And so I was really connected with CMHA before I got a job there. So that's a really big piece in volunteering in the community and getting to build those connections. So you can like apply for jobs later. People will know you and you'll have contacts. So yeah.
Jana, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. It was bound to happen at least once. Thank you, Aisha. And now we'll go to Leah. Leah, can you tell us about your time at King's?
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time at King's. I didn't know that I'd end up spending 3 degrees there, but when I started my undergrad in Than, and then I started to learn about social work, and maybe that was the direction I wanted to go, I didn't want to leave the 4-year degree. I wanted to finish so that I could attend all of those classes and get that piece because it was so essential in, I think, moving forward in my career path. I think the other panelists have touched on it, but it's the community of King's and the connection to profs. I, during my undergrad, spent a lot of time volunteering in palliative care, which opened up my mind to working with different professionals and providing care. And so some of the extracurriculars that I did at King's were the interprofessional health education program. And so I represented social work and worked with other disciplines across main campus to talk about how we could provide great care as a healthcare team. I was also on the MSW governance committee, which was just another way of being connected. But I think just by the nature of how King's is, my relationships with my profs, very similar to everyone else, really continued into my career and allowed me to go back to those profs and connect for different job opportunities or academic opportunities, even post-education. So favorite profs, definitely Eunice as well. I think it's really interesting when I think back now to pre-COVID, a lot of my Than classes were online. So experiencing professors from all over was really wonderful as well during that time. But for me, Rick Cernick in social work as well, and Andrew Mantelak, who helped connect me after my time at King's.
Thank you very much, Leah. Okay, I must apologize. I'm just going to take a minute for not starting the live transcript. I will be perfectly transparent. This is my first time to host a webinar. So it is back. It's on now, I believe. So if there's any more problems, please do let me know. And I do apologize for that. Okay, so we will go to the next question. And this time I will start with Britton. We'll mix it up just a little bit, not too much though. Can you tell us what you do now and just some sub questions to consider while you're answering? What led you to this career? Did your program influence your career choices? Did you need additional schooling, which I think we've talked a little bit about, and has this always been your goal?
Well, starting in biomed, I had no goal. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. But like I said, I started doing some volunteering and trying to figure out what I liked. And I learned that I really liked that work with people, that you're getting to work that frontline component. So something I'd say is while you're in university, you don't have to wait until you're done to get experience. Like there are so many different jobs you can start out doing right away. And maybe it's not your dream job right away, but you're building a lot of skills and confidence. Like Aisha talking about CMHA, phone calling, support line. I worked as a receptionist at a very high-end retirement home. Then I ended up doing in-home support for seniors privately. So working for a company where it was everything from helping people with showers to taking people for errands. But in that time, you got to know so many different families from different backgrounds and cultures. And I really found with myself, it helped me build a lot of confidence in knocking on the door and going in to see someone I've never met, where, you know, coming into university, that really wasn't a skill I had built. So while I'm in school, I got to develop that. And then as a frontline social worker, you need that because you're meeting new people constantly, and building up that skill was very, very helpful. So I'd say don't wait. You can start right away. There's lots of different jobs you could explore. So from that, I learned I really liked working with seniors and their families. There's so much resilience. you're really working with a lot of life experience, where I found a lot of my colleagues that worked with children, they were very passionate about it, but I really liked kind of the meat you get when you work with seniors and their families. There's just a lot to learn, and I feel very humbled by learning about their life and their experiences and being able to partner with them in their journey. I ended up doing my social work, my 4th year internship with the Alzheimer's Society. So that was a great in for me, to get to know the field and working with Alzheimer's and other dementias. Then ended up working in Oxford County for a while and then coming back to London. So now I'm the enhancing care clinician. So there's a program, Mount Sinai, doing group psychotherapy, teaching skills for care partners. So a lot of problem solving therapy is used. And we also use simulated patients to practice communication skills. Many care partners are saying, well, what do I say if they're hallucinating? What do I say if someone's fixated on something? And, you can give them tips and tricks, but to actually build that skill and practice is amazing. I really love doing that program. And now I also do a lot of the grief support. So I run a program called Life After Dementia. So for care partners, after the person with dementia dies, as we know in thanatology, there's a lot of loss, identity, purpose, meaning. They've been dealing with ambiguous loss and disenfranchised grief. So it's a chance to kind of really acknowledge that and debrief and then connect to bereavement services. So that's one of my favorite programs to run. I did end up getting my master's in social work. I found my bachelor's helped me get the initial job. And then I find my master's just gives you that extra layer to apply. It's your checkbox to get into different trainings, different jobs. I found the skill building was much greater in my BSW compared to my master's. The master's for me felt like more of that checkbox. It's really that work experience that gives you more. So I wouldn't get too hung up on which program you do. It's more what you do with that knowledge. As my bio said, now I'm also studying equine facilitated wellness. So how to partner with horses in your work. So with my thanatology background, I'm hoping to do grief work with the horses because we know they are just so attuned, and that immediate biofeedback, then how skilled they are at holding space for people. So I'm hoping to kind of privately explore that side of things too. I hope I answered most of those.
I think you did. Thank you so much for that, Britton. Okay, so we'll go to Aisha next. What do you do now? What led you to your career? And if you need the other questions, let me know.
Yeah, no worries. I'm just pulling it up on my screen beside our Zoom. All right, so currently I work full-time with Cmha, as you mentioned before. I'm an addiction and mental, we just actually changed our title because we just amalgamated with addiction services. And it has a very long name, but I'll just stick to Cmha. So I am an addiction and mental health worker. So yeah, I started at Cmha as a volunteer. And when I did, so I was a volunteer, and then I actually right before graduating in 2018, I got a job at Dale Brain Injury Services, and I was working as a relief worker there with people in assisted living who had acquired brain injuries or traumatic brain injuries. And so that really related to thanatology and the idea of loss, right? And all those other kinds of losses and non-death losses, right? And so that was a really lovely job. I worked there for about a year. And then I actually got a job, I think in August, working at Cmha, and then I'm not allowed to be a volunteer anymore. So I was just working between those two jobs. And then eventually, I think a big thing with when you're starting out, there's lots of contracts. So yeah, I started on a contract at Cmha and eventually got hired on as full-time. I work, it's a first contact role. So I work at the crisis center here in London. And so I intake people. It's a lot of managing people. So social skills are really big, diverting crisis and really calming people down. And I think thanatology did a really good job of preparing me for that. A lot of the courses I found to be really counseling based. There's a lot of like learning how to talk with people and connecting with people. And I think that's a really big piece. I think that's really important. I can think of some courses that would have prepped me, like counseling psychology. I took that again with Carrie Arnold, and things like that. I really feel like it fosters that connection between people. And so, yeah, I knew that I wanted to go further in my career, and it actually took me a while to get where I am today. I thought that I wanted to go into occupational therapy, and I did apply and I didn't get in. And, when I didn't get in, I was sad for like a minute. And then I was like, I didn't think that was right anyways. So, it really takes a long time and a while to figure out what you want. I think that there's maybe like societal standards where people think I should know what I want to do right away. And that's just not the truth. Like, it takes time. Britton was talking about experience. It takes like trying different things and figuring out what's right for you. It really does. The first thing you think of, it might not be the right thing. You might even finish a program and realize that it's just not for you, and that's okay. And so I applied to occupational therapy, didn't get in. So I'd taken a year off, applied, and then took some time for myself again to think about it. And it was actually while I was working at Cmha, well, still am, that I came in contact with one of my colleagues, and she was studying art therapy. And I was like, because I had been thinking about social work. I feel like a lot of people go into the social work field, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It just didn't feel necessarily right for me. And I'd been thinking about it, humming and hawing. And then I heard about art therapy, and I was like, And somebody had actually said something to me about, there's so many different programs out there. It's like, do your research. There's so much. I think that sometimes people just hear, like, I think we hear a lot of these jobs where like police officer or like nurse, and then people just get into that focus, but there's so many places that you can go, so many little niches and spots to fill. And so when I heard art therapy, I was like, I'm intrigued. And I looked into it and I did some work, and I was able to actually shadow somebody for an entire group, an art therapy group. And I was like, this is for me. I think I like this. And so I applied and I got in, and I'm currently completing my studies while I'm working. And I think I figured out at least where I'm going for now. And, you can always continue building your skills as you go on. I'm interested in somatic therapies, and I'm like, maybe when I'm done, I'll do something in that field. And so, it's ever expanding and always changing, and you're always learning. So, I just want to say that sometimes there's this feeling of pressure, and, where's that pressure coming from? Like, think about that for yourself, because you have lots of time and you don't have to rush into anything. So I just want to say that. It hasn't always been my goal to be where I am today, but I found it. And so I think, if that's answered the question. Is there anything else that I missed?
I think you've covered it, Aisha. Thank you so much, very much. And thank you to all of you for giving good thought to these questions. Next, we'll go to Leah. Can you tell us what you do now, and was it always your goal, etc.?
Yeah, so similar to the others, my career path has taken some twists and turns. And when I was volunteering in palliative care during my undergrad, I thought this is where I want to be. And I really loved the hospital setting. I loved working in an interdisciplinary team and learning from my colleagues and coworkers. And so that is kind of what I had my sights set on. And so I then took the path to social work to hopefully get into that space in that way. And I had some mentorship from the social worker that was working in palliative at the time. And so I ended up then going into my undergrad in social work, and I asked for placements related to death and dying, and they kind of steered me a different direction and said, this is where kind of all of your experience has been, maybe trying out some different things, and maybe looking at different areas related to loss and grief. And so I did a few placements, one being in child welfare and realized that that was definitely not for me. I'm not an enforcement focused person. And so I knew that that wasn't it. And then I ended up in dual diagnosis and had worked a bit in the community with teens with various different living with different disabilities. And so I was trying to kind of fit all the pieces together, and kind of like the others have said, I wasn't really sure where I wanted to be, but I knew that I wanted this theme of loss and grief and supporting people in that way to be something that was present in my work. And so my final placement in my master's was in sexual assault and domestic violence at St. Joe's. And it was really there that I realized that, the non-death losses and supporting survivors with various aspects of grief and loss after experiencing gender-based violence was the fit for me, and that the pieces that I had learned in THAN, I could really translate into the work that I was doing there. So I was really fortunate that I was hired there part-time when I finished my master's. And then at that time in 2015, there was a lot happening with the Ontario government related to sexual violence and gender-based violence. And so colleges and universities had to have a standalone sexual violence policy. And so Fanshawe was one of the first colleges in Ontario to have a person dedicated to supporting survivors. And so kind of just linking that back to my King's connections is I had a prof who actually reached out to me and said, hey, one of your old profs is actually working at Fanshawe now and is going to be posting this job. You might be interested in it. And I think that really speaks to the relationships at King's, is that your profs actually know you and who you are as a person, and maybe the directions you're going. And I felt in some of my other studies on main campus, I didn't have those same connections. And so it was because of that kind of tap on my shoulder that this job would be coming up that I applied, and then got the full-time position I'm in now, which is supporting survivors on campus. So I advocate and help do case management and system navigation for survivors of any type of gender-based violence, but also do education, programming, and preventative work on campus as well. And so I would definitely say I didn't know at the time, but now I know it's my dream job because it actually combines so many things that were really spoke to me. And it wasn't just a job, but it was more so like kind of a calling and a passion. And so I definitely think, yeah, the twists and turns of where that ended up, but it all kind of leads back to the connections that I had at King's and what that looked for me in the community.
Great. Thank you so much, Leah. And now, Sarah, to you. Can you tell us what you do now and what led you there?
Yeah, so now I'm an intake worker at the Family Counseling Center. And obviously, like its name, we do counseling, so individual, couple, and family. So my primary role is when people call in for counseling, I talk to them, let them know what we offer, do an assessment with them. And one of the biggest things is listening about their losses throughout their lives. And that can be anything. One of the biggest things that I started doing when I was here, we would ask the question if they've experienced any recent losses. And I opened it up to death loss and non-death loss. And it's amazing the different answers now that we get when clients are telling us their stories. We also do different programs that I have my hands in a little bit. So we have our advocacy and support workers for those in the community with disabilities that need a little bit of extra help, like financial, the Tel-Check program. So for those who have disabilities or elderly living in the community, we help with calls out every night to them, and as well as the distress line. We have the starting point program. So for youth who have behavioral issues, disabilities, we help their parents support them and navigate community services. And we also have the partner assault response program. So those that have been perpetrators of domestic violence, they come for a 6-week program. So I have kind of my hand in all of those. And for my job, they really wanted a BA, volunteer experience, and knowing community resources. So like everybody said, volunteering is really key. You get that hands-on experience and those connections to the community for when jobs come up. My volunteer coordinator here through the Tel-Check Distress Line program let me know about this job when it came up. And she was an amazing reference. And I've been here for a year now. So very, very thankful for that. Like everybody, my journey here was kind of twists and turns. I graduated, moved home to Sarnia, was working retail, and really had no idea where I wanted to go. One of my professors from Lambton College called me and said, hey, we're doing this research project through NSERC, which is the Natural Science Engineering Research Council of Canada, on human trafficking in the community. And she said, do you want to come? for 2 years. And I said, oh my gosh, yes, please. And through that time, it's amazing how much the survivors of human trafficking have experienced loss, not only before being brought into exploitation, throughout their time in exploitation, but after. We interviewed probably about 12 survivors, and they all had different stories on how they came to where they are for exploitation and after, as well as just listening to everybody in the community on how we could support those people. So that opened my eyes to a whole bunch of other different losses that people have experienced. And then during that time, I had come on to volunteer with our distress line, which led me to, during the pandemic, we all were working from home and we needed extra support for our volunteers. Right now, we probably have about 50 volunteers who are working all from home, and we needed support figuring how everybody was going to do that. So that's where that led me, and I was doing that along with the research project. And then my job came up, and I do still put in some time with the distress line as well, my off time. Not as much, just because my job is primarily on the phone now, so I definitely don't want to burn out. But this job, I describe it as one I didn't know I wanted until I had it. Everybody kind of in the agency the first month was like, how are you liking it? And I was like, I never knew this was something I wanted. I didn't think I wanted the desk job. I wanted to be out in the community doing the hands-on things. I just saw somebody ask where I work. I work at the Family Counseling Center in Sarnia, and I've realized I love talking to people on the phone, listening to their stories. And sometimes the hardest thing for those people is making that first initial phone call to us. And you listen to their voice at the beginning of the call, nervous, shaky, they don't really know what to say. And by the end of the call, it's a whole different thing. And I love being a part of their journey, even though I might only talk to them for 20 minutes to a half hour, leaving them to who their counselor is going to be. It makes a difference. And that's my favorite part. And yeah, so Thanatology definitely supported me with that. Pairing with my SSW diploma, my social service worker diploma, they definitely went hand in hand on what I do now.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Okay, we're going to shift gears to another question. And this time we'll start with Aisha. Might be noticing a pattern here. How has COVID-19 impacted your work life? And for example, any changes you've seen in your industry? Are you working from home? Do you think some of these changes are long-term, and are there positive changes or improvements?
All right. So I feel like I forgot to answer part of the question before. So is it okay if I just touch on it really quickly? I also wanted to talk about working in the bereavement program at Cmha, and I think I'm a little nervous to be talking in front of everybody, and I completely skipped over it. So I'll just answer that really quick, and then I'll go to the question. So at Cmha, there's a bereavement program, and it's for a suicide loss, which is very close to thanatology, and I don't know, I forgot. So the role that I have, they have like a bereavement counselor who does like sessions with people who fit into that category and have somebody in their life who has died by suicide, but they also have a group for parents whose children have died by suicide. And I've helped co-facilitate for the past about 2 years, the group where they come together and parents can talk about their experience. It's a much more, it's not a very structured group, but that was my role within the bereavement services program, and opened my eyes. My thanatology background was very, very useful and important, and really understanding that kind of loss. And it's really a disenfranchised loss. There's lots of struggles and other losses that come along with losing somebody to suicide. And so I just really want to speak to that piece and that connection in my work. But as for COVID, so working at the crisis center, my role really hasn't changed a lot. As a crisis worker, it's considered essential healthcare. And so I've been working the entire pandemic at my job, showing up every day. There was a brief stint where we were doing like half shifts at home, so there were less people on the premises, but I would have to go in later. There was never a time where I completely was able to work from home. Just because it was essential. There were parts of the agency where people would be working from home. Like we have the reach out line, if anybody's heard about it, it's the crisis line here in London. And so people were able to work from home in that sense, but as coming into the crisis center and actually seeing a counselor, that was always still an option throughout the entire pandemic. And so I was right there answering the door and greeting people. But as for COVID and loss, huge, as I'm sure everybody can guess, the loss of social connections, the loss of normalcy in life, and just definitely was felt throughout my work. I also work on the reach out line. And so there's lots of people who have called, and I would say that the calls throughout the pandemic have skyrocketed because people just have been scared to come out of their home. And honestly, I think that the amount of people we have coming into the crisis center now and when things started opening up has increased. I think that people are feeling a bit more comfortable leaving their home and kind of reaching out for services. Yeah, so definitely COVID has had like a huge impact on mental health, as I'm sure everybody can guess. People are struggling. And so the work in mental health right now is huge. And I think that most of us work in mental health on this panel. And I feel like that's where thanatology really ends up leading you. Again, like I said, those counseling skills, it really kind of pushes you in that direction. Let me just look at the questions again to see if I'm missing anything. Long term. So yeah, at the organization, I was saying people working from home. For reach out for a different program that I don't work in, there's long-term changes. I think that having people work from home has been a big thing, and people like it. It depends on the person. I really love that the entire pandemic, I was able to go into work and still see people because I lived alone, and I still do live alone. So it's really nice to have that connection. And so I see some long-term changes. I see them at my work trying to advocate for more funding for the Reach Out program, as that has been like hugely used throughout the entire pandemic. I'm trying to think of anything else that's really changed within where I work. I think Reach Out is the biggest piece. We're honestly a bit overwhelmed sometimes by how much people are reaching out, but it's a good thing. I'm glad that people feel comfortable and safe in doing that, because I think it's really important. It's been a time of intense isolation, and as we know, isolation is one of those like risk factors for people, especially with suicide. So yeah.
It's not unmuting.
We could hear you just now.
Oh, okay. My computer seems to be, I don't know, something's not working right, but I'm glad that I'm not muted. That's good. Okay, so let's move on. Leah, can you tell us about COVID and how it's impacted your work?
Yeah, so the first March of COVID, with the college, I did end up going home to work full time, as well as my part-time job in the hospital doing counseling. So that being said, my students were still, their lives were shifting obviously online in a lot of ways too. And so some students were participating in virtual court for their assaults. And so that meant that there was times where they didn't want to do court at home. It wasn't maybe safe with roommates around, or others, there wasn't a lot of privacy. And so I was still going on campus to see students for various reasons. So I had the ability to do that and to meet students' needs in that way. It just was, the majority of the work was obviously taking place within my home. And so there were some positives and some negatives to that. I think in the work that I do, and I'm sure in the work that the rest of the panelists do as well, since we're all in similar fields, boundaries and self-care is really important. And I think it's something we talked a lot about in school, but maybe as an eager new professional wasn't always something that I took 100% seriously, because there is a lot of pressures on us to be productive in our society in more ways than one. And so I really noticed with COVID, as I opened up my home to the trauma that my clients were experiencing, I didn't have as clear boundaries as I did when I was in the office and able to kind of transition from work to home. and keep those things separate. And so that in itself has been a bit of a loss for me, is just the safety of my home being my home and my space for me. And so that's something that I've noticed with COVID. But the other kind of positives is a lot of my programming on campus related to supporting survivors was only accessible to certain people who could come in to actually attend the programming. And because I support students on all different campuses, not just London campus, but St. Thomas and Woodstock and Simcoe, I could go there to do programming, but it wasn't as consistent as what we were offering on main campus. And so accessibility with COVID was a really big thing. We were breaking down a lot of barriers to people being able to access care in the way that felt best to them, and giving options. And I think that there was a lot of hesitancy in organizations to do that prior to COVID. And so one of the changes I've seen is just reaching students in much different ways. So even for some of my students, they're studying in their home country. So they're international students that aren't even here in Canada yet. And being able to participate in programming and supports, even when they're in their home countries, was really awesome and had a lot of unintended awesome outcomes. And so I would say, with any kind of change, like there's positives and there's negatives, and kind of balancing those. And where do I see that going from here? I see that there's a lot more support from my organization. And even in my hospital job, where I'm providing counseling support to survivors, some of them, are 16 and they don't drive yet and have to rely on parents to bring them into appointments, or they're elderly and perhaps don't drive, or they're coming in from other areas because we serve a pretty large catchment area. And so by this shift of allowing for virtual service delivery and in person, like I said, we're removing some of those barriers, allowing people to access care that maybe wouldn't have been able to access it in the traditional ways we were before. And I think organizations have seen the benefits of that. And so I think some of those things are going to stay the same, which is really lovely. And I think also lovely for me to have the ability to be back in the office face to face with people, because that's why we choose this work too, is to work with people. And some of those connections can be lost through virtual service. So having that balance is really, really nice. But I guess I would stress, and I don't know if this is even the time, but the piece around just looking after yourself and allowing yourself to rest. I don't think it's something we talk about enough. Even in our off time, we're trying to be productive in our personal lives. And sometimes it's just about giving ourselves space to be. And so that's something I think that COVID kind of forced on me as well, which I think is a positive thing.
You're on mute, Jana. Sorry, Sarah, I believe it's your turn. How has COVID impacted you and your work life?
So when I started, I was full-time in the office. A lot of the other staff were on more of a hybrid model, when they were in a couple of days a week and then a couple of days from home doing phone and video. In January, when we went back into lockdown, we kind of went to more of the skeleton crew model, when only 6 to 7 people were in the agency at a time. So I was working from home until probably about mid-April. And like Leah said, those boundaries really became something I had to focus on. And I believe it was Darcy talked about drawers and putting things in separate drawers. And I really started doing that at home, because I found that I was working in my bedroom, just because that was the quietest and most confidential space for me. And I found that my sleep was impacted, my downtime was impacted. So I really had to work on those boundaries, and was super thankful when I came back to the office. Full-time, our staff was now back as of July. And we've started offering face-to-face counseling again. I do believe that phone and video is going to be around for a long time now. As Leah said, it's really broken down those barriers for our clients that have transportation issues and don't want to have to tell, especially like a mom and dad, hey, I'm going to counseling, can you take me? It's giving people that confidentiality again, that they don't have to tell their family members or their friends that they're going somewhere. So I think that's really great that we're now able to open up our agency. We never close, because like Aisha said, we are a frontline service, so we are needed at all times. And I think, again, this is going to be long-term, that we're offering phone, video, and face-to-face, and people have been really receptive to that, which is great.
Thanks, Sarah. And I think we have time for the final question. What advice would you give to a student or recent graduate looking to enter your field? For example, what do you wish you knew when you were a student? And following along with the pattern, I believe it's Leah's turn.
I was just going to say, Cher, would you like me to answer the COVID one too?
I'm sorry, I lost.
I'll be quick. I know we're close to time.
Go ahead.
So with COVID has really changed my work. So before COVID, I was doing a lot of home visits, and home visits are just such a gold mine for learning about people. As we know in thanatology and in social work, you learn so much about people in their environment. You know, when someone comes into the office, you can learn a lot, but you learn just so much when you go in and you see their physical space and you see, you know, how they're interacting with others in their home. So there was a great loss in that respect when we had to go to virtual. Of course, with working with people with Alzheimer's and other dementias, they're a very high risk population with COVID. So it was a time of a lot of fear, grief, stress. A lot of services shut down really quickly. So the adult day programs, respite services, and long-term care. So we saw with our clients, not only could we not see them in person, but a lot of supports just had to fall off for protection, which was very, very hard for care partners. So much like Aisha said about the intensity of calls, certainly the intensity has increased, and it stays pretty high because services are back, but nowhere near where they were. And long-term care wait times are just crazy. Like, it's years. You're not getting in within months. Even crisis, like, you're not getting in. So a lot of my role is advocacy, helping people navigate the system, making safety plans. Before COVID, I would be going into medical offices and helping to make a diagnosis and investigate cognitive concerns, and then connecting people with social supports. Those have really stopped too. So even the process of getting a diagnosis has really been bogged down. So there's all these people at home that are thinking, is this normal aging, or is this something I need to be worried about? And to get in to see a specialist is like a year. So even though I'm not a doctor, it's talking about what's in our control. What can I ask my doctor about? What are some things I could explore? What are some things I could try? So a lot is just knowledge, case management. And then the one group I do is really skill building, because when we're in times of crisis, we're not getting those support. So I need to learn the skills as a primary care partner. What's in my control? What can I do? So that's been very valuable. I also want to know, I've been so impressed with the resiliency of my population that I work with. The amount of 80 and 90-year-olds I've been able to teach to use Zoom, it's just amazing. And when you think of this population where, you know, they grew up with a party line for their phone if they had a phone in their home, and now they're on Zoom, like, it's incredible. I've just been so proud of them, and so many support groups online. We're starting to do some things in person, but it's definitely going to continue in a hybrid model, because a lot of people that are in a care partner role can't leave the home. Then again, we also have people who they want to come into the office because the person they're caring for doesn't have insight and can be really triggered if they hear their partner talking about them or talking about the situation. So of course, wanting to keep people safe, we really need to have in-person options as well. So pros and cons, like Leah said, for sure, but I think it's here to stay.
Thank you, Britton. My apologies, I didn't mean to miss you. Okay, Leah, how about just one thing? What one piece of advice would you give to a current student?
I think we've already touched on it, so I won't say much, but except for volunteering and networking, you don't know what's available to you until you make those connections and explore them a bit further. And we're lucky in London to have a pretty connected community. And I think that's probably the same for other communities as well. And so making those connections, going out and just setting up a meeting with someone if you're interested in knowing more about their job. I think I was really nervous to do things like that and put myself out there, but the times that I have has been really obviously led to me getting this job and showing interest. And so I would say, you know, push through some of those barriers to reaching out and setting up a meeting or volunteering somewhere where you think you may be interested in working, because you might find that it's maybe not that, it's maybe something else.
Okay, thank you, Leah. Sarah, one piece of advice you would give to a current student?
I'm also going to say volunteering and placements in school or practicums. It is hands-on experience. You're going to learn what you like, what you don't like, and you never know, your supervisors might be along the lines of a job reference or a master's reference, or it might help you connect with those jobs. So it's really about networking while you can and learning what you may and may not want to do in the future.
Okay, thank you. Aisha, one piece of advice.
All right. So I think what Leah and Sarah have said are fabulous. So I'm going to give you something different. I think following your gut and trusting your instincts is really important. And it's only something that I'm really starting to learn to do now. But trusting yourself, what's coming up for you in your gut, in your work, your volunteer experience, and in your life, and like really just aligning to what's good for you will lead you to the path that you're supposed to take. And I think that we let so much other noise impact us, and that you really just need to tune into yourself and what's good for you. So something a little bit different to think about.
Thanks, Aisha. Britton.
I agree with Sarah and Leah. Like, number one is definitely get your feet wet, just try things. But I'll try to give you something different. I think look for people who inspire you, whether or not they're in a mentor role, but find those people who you either like the way that they work, like their style, like what they're doing. It really is about connection in this field and relationships. So keep your eyes open to find those people and make those connections.
Okay, thank you. Jana, I take it you cannot unmute. Okay. So I'm going to guess what comes next. Our question and answers. If anybody has questions, can you please write a post in the question and answer section? I have one question. What skills? Oh, Jana, are you speaking to me? Okay, I'm just going to go ahead until you can unmute. What skills do you apply from your time at King's into the real world? How does the theory from the classroom apply to a practical sense? I think we've answered this in many ways. Does somebody want to address that?
I'll just add that I think something from not just King's, but thanatology in general, it wasn't specific modalities or, you know, what to say or what to do that really has carried me through. It's more an awareness. It's that curiosity that I think when you go into Than, the idea of death and loss and bereavement can feel so heavy and so scary. And it was being in such a welcoming and supportive place to explore what loss means and what grief means. And I think that knowledge and awareness, I think we've all touched on, is really carried through with our presentation, and it's in our work. Everyone you meet is going to have some type of loss, and not everyone gets the education that we do of what do we do with that. And I think we can take that for granted, that we had that experience of that safety and place to be curious about it, and what do we do. So I think that's really what stuck with me.
Okay, thank you. I think these questions, they were asked fairly early on, so I think we've answered them. Have you found that your thanatology degree has helped you in both your professional and personal life? Does somebody want to address that again?
I can talk about that. I find that it helps you with knowing loss is not linear. It is a roller coaster ride, and meeting people where they're at, just listening to them and going, okay, you might be here, and just doing that reflection with them and helping them know, like, hey, it's okay. We're here to listen. And it's really helped that in personal life and professional. I talk to people from 12 to late into elderly lives, and just, again, meeting where they're at, how they may comprehend that. So those classes where you're able to kind of learn those things too.
Okay, thank you. How has the certificate in loss, grief, and bereavement studies benefited you if you completed it?
I guess I can speak to that. I really, my personal experience with the certificate was that I had taken so many Than classes already that I just continued and like took and then added the specific ones for the certificate because I was already doing so many, but I just think it just expanded more of my knowledge. It was just more courses because they're all like thanatology courses. So it just gave me more. Like I took a creative responses to death and loss course, which, you know, at the time didn't make the connection, but very connected to where I am now. And it gave me more information. You have different topics you talk about, and, you know, like the certificate, it's also something that just applies to my life. Like other panelists were saying, loss and death is going to come up in every single person's life on this planet. So literally it works with my social skills and my communication with just people in everyday life, and then also in my job, right? So I think it's just been really useful in general. And then I guess I can speak to this other question. So it's about graduate study and accessing THAN-related work. So grief counseling. So you can go other ways, like you can go to social work, but usually like in order to do like counseling based work, so like grief therapy or like grief counseling, you need to have a master's level or you can be an SSW as well, a social service worker, but you have to be registered with a college in order to do that kind of work and have insurance and be governed by a body with like regulating rules and things like that. So that piece is really important. So that's why I think the master's level education is really important, because in order to do that kind of work, you need that kind of stuff in the background for you. So really depends on what you want to do. If you don't want to do counseling based work, masters might not be so important for your path. But if you do want to do that counseling piece, that's the reason. Insurance, regulating body. Yeah.
Thanks, Aisha. Does anybody else want to address that question? How important is graduate study in your work?
I will share too about the question about the certificate. So mine was the BA in Thanatology, but I found having that piece of paper that said, you know, I studied Thanatology really helped me when I came to the Alzheimer's Society to make new programs, because it gave me almost like some clout of, I promise I know what I'm talking about. I was able to make 2 programs. I made an ambiguous loss and grief program for care partners. And I was able to make the Life After Dementia program. So because I had that piece of paper, I think that gave my management peace of mind to know it wasn't just, you know, somebody who read a book and was like, yeah, I'm going to do this now. It was someone coming who had spent years talking about it, working with professors and classmates. And I found it just opened the door and kind of gave me a little bit of weight behind me. And then the question about masters, I kind of mentioned earlier, I think it's what you do with it. It's not your classes. Your classes themselves are not going to make you a great therapist and a counselor if that's what you're interested in. There are so many different trainings out there, like Aisha doing art therapy, people who want to study things like EMDR, CBT. Like if you want to get really good in something, that comes after your master's, if that's what you're interested in. So the master's is kind of your ticket into those. It gives you a base. It gives you that permission to be registered, to be in a regulatory body. You're definitely going to learn stuff in your program. It's what you make of it. But it doesn't end there. It's kind of you're signing up for a lifelong learning if that's the area you want to work in.
Okay, thank you. And Leah, we have a direct question for you here. As a nursing student, I'd like to know more about your time in palliative care and what you wished nurses would know about what you do.
Yeah, so I was really lucky always in my hospital teams. Even now, my hospital team is made up of social workers and nurses. We don't even have physicians there on a daily basis. And so I think what I've been fortunate to experience is the relying on each other for the pieces of the puzzle to holistically support the client. So we're nurses, there's a lot of obviously time constraints on providing the medical care. There's so many pieces where social work can attend to all the other dimensions of life and wellness. And so I think what I witness and what I hope other interdisciplinary teams take advantage of is the expertise that each position brings, and that you don't have to carry the entire weight of the team, or provide or be able to show up. And even us in our roles, I don't want to be the only support person in someone's life, and I don't want to be the only person providing things. A team approach is always much better. And so I think where we can attend to sometimes it's the spiritual concerns or the family concerns or the other conflicts that someone's having, or job or housing. There's lots of different pieces that as a social worker in those roles that we can look at supporting the client with. And so it's just, again, like knowing what's your scope of practice and where can you tap on those in your team to help put that whole puzzle together to wrap around the patient.
Thank you, Leah. I believe we are at time now.
We are, and I'm back. I am so sorry. My apologies. Technology has not been my friend. I could see and hear everyone, but I could no longer use my keyboard at all, and not even my touch screen. But thank you to Corey Cook from our ITS who got me back. I was afraid of closing out because I didn't want to end the meeting, and so he was able to come in and back in. So thank you all so much for your time today. Thank you, Sherry, for driving this while I was not able to. And thank you, Corey and Aurelia, who works in our office, who helped facilitate today's webinar as well. So thank you, everyone. I guess if anyone has any other questions, they can fill them through our office or through Sherry, and we'll make sure questions are answered back to you students. So anything else anyone wants to add before we're finished? No, okay. All right. Thank you so much again. I hope everybody enjoyed that. I certainly enjoyed hearing from everyone. And I guess, Sherry, we'll let you take over in person in your classes next week. So, all right. Thank you. I'm going to hit leave. So I think we're finished. So bye, everyone.